Welcome to Behind the Catch Fence. I'm your host, David Hoffman. We're on to episode 59, and it's a monumental 60th, literally right around the corner. It's next week, guys. But before that, if you missed any of our latest episodes with drivers like Tony Schumacher, Joey Logano, Donnie Schatz, Lance Deweese, or Kyle Petty, go check them out. Well, on today's show, IMSA WeatherTech sports car star Colin Braun joins the show. A lot of you may know him from his brief time in NASCAR with Jack Roush and his truck and Xfinity program, but man, has Braun ever carved out an incredible sports car career. Now, Braun has won everything from the Rolex 24 at Daytona, the 12 hours of Sebring, the 6 hours at the Glen, scored podiums at the 24 hours of Le Mans, and much more. Now, as he races in LMP2 for CrowdStrike Racing, he's also racing part-time in IndyCar. You'll hear more about that opportunity as well. So with that, sit back, relax, grab your favorite snack, maybe some almonds for a little bit of healthy goodness, and enjoy this episode with Colin Braun.
Hey dude, how are you?
Hey, how you doing, Colin?
Good man. How about you?
Good. Yeah, I appreciate you taking the time. I know you got a
Yeah,
pretty busy schedule here coming up, and obviously you just got back. You just came back from where were you at again? Like maybe Sonoma, was it? You won or what was it?
Sonoma.
Okay.
Yes, sir. Yep, Sonoma for the SRO GT3 deal. So yeah, that was good.
Yeah.
Winning is always good.
And yeah, I mean, I wanted to have you on the show because you've done everything imaginable: NASCAR, IndyCar, now IMSA, sports cars. So I mean, this interview is going to be a little bit more about just your whole career, which which could go a long time. I just want to learn more about it. So just kind of going
I
into
love
it.
it.
Yeah, let's go right to the beginning. Where did your love for racing begin?
Well, I think for me it started at a super young age. My dad was a race car engineer all the time that I grew up, and so obviously watched his cars. He was, engineering whether it's NASCAR, Indy 500, IndyCar kind of vehicles. He did a bit of everything, sports cars. So, as a little kid growing up, I was just fascinated with racing. And then when I was about 5 years old, he was like, "Hey, do you want to get a go-kart or a quarter midget and kind of try dip your toe in this?" And of course, being a young boy, I was like, yeah, that sounds amazing. And so needless to say, I was sort of hooked in from that point forward, I would say.
And I know you end up going into karting and everything. Just, I mean, you mentioned your dad being everywhere, doing in all sorts of different disciplines. With that, just was your mindset on a single motorsport at the time, or just kind of want to see where it went at that time?
Well, I think probably like any young person getting into racing, you're like, dreams of I'm going to make it to Formula One, right? That was kind of my goal as a 6 year old. And then, I think as I kind of went up through the ranks and realized more and more, how difficult that is, not only from obviously like the on track performance side, but, also just from the how do you get there? How do you put the pieces together? How does the financial side work? Those kind of things. I think it became more of a realization that, hey, I'd love to make a career out of driving race cars, whatever that is, whether it's, sports cars, NASCAR, IndyCar, whatever, like, to not have to have a real job, so to speak, and be able to, kind of do your passion of driving race cars and be able to make a living doing that was quickly kind of my main focus and goal for sure.
And it didn't take too long. He ended up at the Rolex 24 at 16 years old, which is crazy to say, for the first time there in '05. Just it's just crazy to think about. Just how hard was that for you to go into such a big event like it is, just like a worldly event, and to kind of stay focused when there's so much going on around you. You're only 16, so I'm sure there was a lot of just kind of like nostalgia with that.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, that was one of my favorite races in kind of, I guess, looking back in my history. I mean, it was such a fun event, and it was one that I went to so many years as a little kid, whether I was 6, 7, 8 years old, going to that race, watching my dad engineer and work on cars there at Daytona. I mean, I remember sitting up in the grandstands into turn one at night, watching the brakes glow and the cars slow down and all that. So I have a ton of fond memories of just that race. And so to be able to be 16 and finally be racing in that race, it was crazy. I mean, I remember kind of middle of the night stint driving down into turn one, like glancing towards the grandstands. Like not long ago, I was sitting up there watching this happen, and here I am driving the car. So that was pretty special. And yeah, I mean, a crazy event. Obviously, one that has so much history. Definitely one where you kind of had to just say, "Hey, look, I'm just focusing on what I'm trying to do. I'm just here to drive the race car. Don't get caught up in all of the sort of things that go on and the pressure and all of that, and just stay focused. And yeah, in the end, we did well. I mean, we made all the laps, completed the race, and that was the goal.
And during that first year especially, who do you feel kind of helped you during that to kind of go through the process of what it takes to be successful in the event and just to kind of like help guide you along during that whole whirlwind?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think we had Ross Bentley driving with us, who's a renowned driver coach, still to this day, has written a ton of books. I always joke with people like he literally has written the book on driver coaching and how to be a fast driver. The Speed Secrets books are his line of work. So he was a guy that we had driving with us and kind of coaching us and guiding us and mentoring that whole time. And then, obviously with my dad, being involved, he was the engineer on that car for us. So ton of experience between those two guys. And yeah, I mean, they were hugely helpful in kind of keeping it all in check and keeping us focused. It was myself and two other 16-year-old guys, Brad Coleman and Adrian Cario. So it was a four-driver lineup, kind of anchored with the experience of Ross on the driving side and then my dad on the engineering side. And yeah, it was a blast for sure.
Then 2 years later, you end up finishing on the podium, 24 hours of Le Mans, which another crazy thing to be able to say about 18 or something like that. Just, I mean, having run both at Daytona and at Le Mans, just what kind of makes those events kind of this in a similar aspect because they're both, prestigious races in their own, but also different.
Yeah, that's a good, interesting question. I mean, they're both, as you say, 24-hour long sports car races, but they are very different. I think the intensity at Daytona is just crazy. I think it's kind of the style of the American sports car racing where we get lots of yellows, you get opportunities with the wave buys and the pit procedures to get your laps back. If you lose a lap, you're not done. You can still have a really good chance to come back and win the race. And inevitably, it seems like we always get a yellow within, the last hour or 30 minutes of Daytona, and it packs all back up and it's a flat out sprint race to the finish. Where on the flip side at Le Mans, they've tried to do some new things to allow you to get your laps back in kind of the recent years, but it's still pretty darn difficult. And it's a little less, I would say, intense for the duration of the race. You've got a little bit more I guess, a relaxed approach because, while there's not as much time to catch up, there's also not that feeling of like, man, this is going to come down to an absolute sprint race at the last couple hours of the race. So I think it's kind of intense at the start. You're keeping up, you're keeping pace, and then quickly it kind of settles in and everyone's sort of running a rhythm through those middle hours of the nights, checking off the laps. And, the laps obviously way longer too. So you just don't have the crazy amount of cars packed into the small circuit like you do at Daytona. So in a way, it's kind of different from that approach, but still, it's I mean, both of those races share a lot of the same DNA when you boil it down.
And obviously, you've had the Rolex 24 experience, then Le Mans, and then NASCAR comes calling here in 2007. Around that time, you get a call from Jack Roush to go become a development driver there. I mean, how did that opportunity come about? Because I guess starting off, did you have any oval experience before NASCAR and having that deal?
Yeah, I did a little bit of quarter midget racing when I was five. In our area where I grew up in Texas, you could start racing quarter midgets when you were five, and you had to wait a few more years back then to be, I think, like eight to start racing go-karts. So I did a couple years of quarter midget racing, and then quickly got into go-karts and never drove an oval ever again until my NASCAR days.
And yeah, just with that development deal, I guess how exciting was that for you to have someone as renowned as Jack Roush be able to, look at you and say, "I believe in you, and I believe in your abilities."
Yeah, it was cool. I mean, obviously, Jack's a legend in the sport and done so much. I was fortunate enough to have a connection through Ford. We had Ford powered Daytona prototype cars when I was racing in Grand Am in the sports car series. And I think the whole deal came about kind of through Ford. They were looking for the next, Jeff Gordon, Jimmy Johnson, those kind of guys at the time. They were like trying to sign everyone that that was coming through that showed really good promise to a development deal. And Ford said, "Hey, we really think you might be the next big thing, and let's kind of look at that if that's something you're into." And so, of course, I was interested in it, and yeah, worked the deal out with Jack, and was able to drive for him for a good handful of years, which was that was fun. It was completely different than what I was used to, and not coming up through legends cars and late models and that sort of path. I had a lot to learn on the racing side of things. For me, driving the car fast and on the limit was really never the big challenge. It was more just, how do you go to Martinsville and race with 35 other trucks neck and neck and do the short track, and then you go to the mile and a half, and you got to learn what the aero does and how all that sort of plays into. So there was a lot of things to learn for sure, but I had great people around me and really enjoyed it.
And obviously, you won a race in Michigan there, and I think it was 2009. You finished fifth in points in the Truck Series, ran part-time in Xfinity the next year, but then it kind of, I guess, fizzled out in a way. Just what kind of happened with that? Because it seemed like I mean, you were still very young, but it just didn't work out.
Yeah, I mean, it was all kind of on the up path. I was learning and getting better and running better and being more consistent, and was felt like I was in a really good position. But unfortunately, about that time, I got to my last season there in the Xfinity car, or Nationwide car back then. That's about the time the economy started to tip here in the U.S. So when I first got to Roush, I think they had five top level cars, four or five Xfinity cars, three trucks, a couple ARCA cars. I mean, they were a huge organization. They had 550 plus employees. And in my last year on the Xfinity car, they were down to, I think, four Cup cars, two Xfinity cars, and that was it. So I think they had 200 people or something. So, I mean, it's just, the whole NASCAR sphere, when that economy kind of went through a rough patch, just shrunk way down. And um, at that time, they obviously were going to keep the Greg Biffles and the Carl Edwards and those level guys and put all the focus on them. And so that's kind of when the whole development thing took a swing. And to be in a development deal from that point sort of forward, it had to be one where you could either bring the money or you had family money to be able to bring and kind of put a program together. I was fortunate, kind of right at the tail end of my deal. They were just hiring people. They had the funding in place to be able to just sort of hire, whoever they thought had a good chance at making it. And yeah, that sort of dried up right about the end of my time. And it's unfortunate, not only obviously for me, but just going forward, it's tough. This sport, it seems like it's tougher and tougher to sort of get into and get going, if you're not in a position to be able to kind of put a deal together. So definitely wish it would swing back that way for the future generations of kids, because yeah, it makes it tough for sure.
And I guess during that time, obviously, you ended up going back into sports cars with pretty seamlessly. Just for you, was that kind of a shock for you that that kind of thing happened, or were you kind of already prepared and mentally ready for that next chapter, which was sports cars?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, I've always kind of looked at my time in NASCAR, even when I made the decision to sort of jump into it and give it a try. Always felt like I could come back to sports car racing and have a great career. I was fortunate to have good results and have a good, perception, I think, in the paddock and things like that, that I felt like no matter what happened in the NASCAR world, whether it was great and I was, off to the races, or if something happened where it was just tough, I didn't figure it out, or, whatever happens with the sponsor side of things, if you could, see it not working out, I felt like I could always come back into sports car racing. And, I have a huge passion for sports car racing and all of that. So I thought, yeah, hey, let's take a chance, see what happens. I'd always, would have regretted not kind of seeing where it would have went, I think. And yeah, I was fortunate that I had a good enough reputation when the NASCAR stuff sort of dried up, that I was able to come back into sports cars and as you said, kind of pick up where I left off, and off we went.
And then since then, obviously, you've carved out Rolex 24 wins, 12 hours of Sebring, Watkins Glen as well. Just, I mean, that list goes on. And looking at it, like 2 years ago, you won overall at Daytona. I think it was the first time for you with Meyer Shank Racing. You had stout lineup, Tom Blomqvist, Elio, and Simon Pagenaud. Just with all those guys, I guess looking at that race and just that team in general, that you guys had last year or 2 years ago. I mean, what stands out to you about just that moment and, with it being the first time you were able to achieve that overall triumph at Daytona?
Yeah, I mean, last year or 2 years ago, I guess, yeah, winning, overall Daytona in the GTP class was huge. I mean, I couldn't have scripted it or written it any better. Obviously with GTP being the very first race ever of it's kind of that new era of hybrid sports cars. Man, it was a huge event. Obviously, everyone was watching, interested to see how the cars ran and performed. And, I was so fortunate to be in the Meyer Shank car. Honda and HPD, HRC, I mean, they've been working so hard, kind of preparing for that race. And yeah, I mean, it was a big unknown, I think, for the whole class of what's this going to look like? How's it going to go? And, our car ran flawless. I mean, it just was one of those perfect races where, we had no issues on the track. We came in for the pit stops, tires, fuel, driver changes, and we did that for 24 hours. And huge testament to what Honda and Acura HRC were able to do. It was sort of one of those where you kind of get to the end and you're like, wow, that went exactly how a perfect race would go. And we, won the race in the end. I mean, it was just like, yeah, absolute perfect execution. And yeah, couldn't have picked a better or, bigger one to win for sure.
And it's interesting because obviously you've been in sports cars the most for your career. Just what is it just about endurance racing and sports car racing that kind of that you enjoy the most out of anything that you have been able to do?
Yeah, I think I really enjoy the aspect of having to be smart at times and sort of go, hey, I'm not going to race this guy right now. We still have a lot of time to go, or man, I'm not going to dive bomb this GT car in traffic and try to get by right now. I'm going to save that for later. And so I think I really enjoy like identifying, what points of the race you need to do certain things and other points where you kind of concede and be smart and fight another day kind of thing. And, I think that's the unique aspect of sports car racing is it's not always just flat out as hard as you can go in all the different facets. I think it's gotten to the point where you kind of drive your own personal self as hard as you can go for the whole Daytona race, but you're making these decisions in traffic and what you're doing and passing, cars that you're racing against, and just always that kind of decision of like, how much do I push? What do I do here? What does this look like? And then there's the strategy piece of it, which it's great. We have smart engineers and people doing that kind of thing. But at the same time, there's lots of good feedback that can come from the driver, especially when you have a lot of experience. I've been fortunate to do Daytona, I think 20 times in a row. So you start to learn and see things and can help. And, I think all those pieces put together, the team aspect, obviously having co-drivers and having to get a car that works for everybody. I mean, a lot of those things make it unique. And for me, a fun challenge for sure.
You have been just now just describing about the just how your mindset and just inside the race car kind of is what you have to do. Maybe I don't do this or do that at this time. How difficult was it for you to transition, I guess, mindset wise as a driver to go from NASCAR where the certain amount of mileage and it's kind of it's laid out in a way compared to sports car racing. How was that transition difficult for you, or was it just kind of like riding a bike per se?
I think it was difficult. I think you just always had to be being pretty aggressive and pushing hard. But then I quickly started to kind of get into the club, into the circle of guys, particularly in the truck series. At that time it was a Ron Hornaday, a Mike Skinner, Todd Bodine, those kind of guys, and they kind of walked me into that group pretty quickly. And, I realized like, hey, if you give a little bit, they're going to give a little bit at certain points in the race. Obviously, you get down to the end and everyone's fighting as hard as they can. But, you get to the first 50 laps in one of those truck races and you're coming up on somebody and you're quite a bit quicker. And you're kind of in that club, they're not going to race you too hard. They're going to kind of let it go and you're going to just kind of ebb and flow. So it was interesting in a way kind of learning those small nuances that are different than what we do on the sports car side. And, in a way, I guess it was kind of similar. I mean, you got to kind of get to the end of the race and be smart and make sure you got a chance with your car to fight at the end instead of, knocking the fender in and losing a bunch of downforce. So a lot of those kind of things, I guess in a way kind of were similar.
And final few questions. Just and now this year, first time driving an IndyCar, you're running for Dale Coyne Racing here part time. Just how did that deal come about? And have you been looking at IndyCar, a lot previously, or just kind of out of the blue in a way?
Yeah, I think for me, I've always wanted to jump in an IndyCar. As an American, certainly again watching my dad, engineer cars in the series and at the 500, something I always really wanted to do, and just my path was not straight to IndyCar like I thought maybe it could be. Um, but I did a lot of time in open wheel cars as a kid, coming up through the ranks and things like that. So yeah, certainly something I always really wanted to get into. And it just never has quite worked out in the past. And, um, you know, we talked about winning Daytona last year in the GTP class. I had a good season. I think that kind of re-brought my name back up to different folks in the IndyCar paddock. And yeah, I got a call from Dale Coyne in December, and he was kind of like, "Hey, are you interested in doing IndyCar stuff?" And I said, like I always do, "Yeah, I'm super into it. I'd love to do it." And hadn't really heard too much. And then right before the St. Pete race, he called and said, "Hey, we're doing this test in Sebring. Come down and give this thing a shot." So I thought, hey, this might be just a 1 day test and that's it. And heck, I get a chance to drive an Indy car and I can't wait. Luckily, it wasn't. It went well, and he asked me to come and do a couple more races. So yeah, it was really really cool. Huge thanks to him and the folks at Honda for making it happen.
What's been that process like for you? You've run the Thermal Club and in St. Pete as well. Just how has that been for you to kind of adjust? I mean, because you're going from a sports car to to an Indy car.
Yeah, it's definitely a big adjustment. It's such a deep field. These guys are so competitive. They're so good. They've been doing it for so long. They are so well prepared. For me, going into St. Pete, I did the 1 day test at the Sebring short course. I'd been to St. Pete about 12 years before in a GT4 car. So essentially, that wasn't very helpful. I realized quite quickly the Indy car was way faster. I was like, told somebody, I was like, this track here in St. Pete feels like it's about half as short as what I remember it being. This thing's so fast. So yeah, I mean, a big transition, and one that I just kind of took the approach of, hey, I'm going to build, just try to improve each session. And I was happy by the time the race rolled around. I was got a good start, got a couple guys on the start, and was able to run, to kind of run, a bit in the mix there, and yeah, kind of learn and make all the laps. I mean, it's you got to get the experience, obviously, to be able to keep building. And you crash on lap one and you don't get any of that experience. So for me, I was really happy to have made all the laps there for sure.
And final question, just do you feel maybe in the future we could see you run a full-time Indy car? Or is this kind of a experiment for now and kind of wait and see for you?
Yeah, who knows? I love driving race cars and I love having a chance to win races. I've really enjoyed it on the IndyCar side, and everyone in the series has been so welcoming and just it's a really fun place to race for sure. So yeah, I mean, who knows what happens? I'm ready, my phone's on. Let's see what happens. It's for me it's just cool. Another kind of race series to have under my belt, experience to have, between all the things we've talked about. I did global rallycross as well. So, I mean, it's just, I love just driving different cool stuff.
Well, Colin, I appreciate you taking the time. It's been cool to see you, do IndyCar and do all these different things. I wish you nothing but the best going forward, and hopefully IndyCar continues to go well. And good luck the rest of the season.
Hey, thanks for having me on, man. I appreciate it.
Thanks for tuning in to episode 59 with Colin Braun. Now, just an incredible conversation, and needless to say, we learned a lot about him. Now, my biggest takeaway just from our conversation was just how versatile he's been in his career. Now, to go from NASCAR, the trucks, and Xfinity, and just to have success in stock cars, and the roll over to sports cars, and just all that racing, and just having both that longevity and boatload of success there as well. And now to have that unique opportunity to give IndyCar a try is just really cool to see. I feel like it's pretty rare for someone to have that chance to try all these different forms of motorsports in this modern age. But we hope you enjoyed our talk with Colin and you learned something new about him today. Well, that's all the time we have for today's episode. Make sure to like and subscribe for more content. And also make sure to follow this podcast on Twitter or X and Instagram at Behind Catch. Make sure to check out the channel for more content here in the coming weeks as well. We got a big month of May coming up, Indy 500, Coke 600. You guys are going to be ready for it. It's going to be exciting. So thanks for tuning in. Have a great rest of your day. Go enjoy some racing this weekend, and I'll catch you guys later.